December 7th of the Christmas Mystery. All the afternoon, Joachim thought about Caspar, the Black King, who had been waiting in Denmark for Elizabeth, the angel Ephriel, and Joshua the shepherd. How did he know they were coming? Did Ephriel and the king of Nubia have an old agreement to meet precisely in the year 1699? There was nothing to suggest that their meeting was accidental. Then he's one of us, the angel has said, as soon as he saw Caspar. It had all begun with the little lamb. Perhaps Elizabeth hadn't been meant to follow it, but the angel in the woods must have known that the lamb would be coming that way. All of a sudden, Joachim thought about the bookseller. He had said that the Advent calendar looked homemade, and Joachim had agreed. It looked as if it had been cut out and glued at home in the kitchen. If John had made the magic Advent calendar, he'd probably named the girl in the story after Elizabeth in the photograph. But why had he done that? Why had he made the Advent calendar and left it in a bookshop without knowing what would become of it? In the evening, when Joachim was going to bed, he tried to push all the doors shut so that he could see the large picture. But before he put out the light, he glanced at the calendar one more time, and thought how strange it must be to be in Bethlehem exactly at the time when Jesus was born. Elizabeth was on her way there now, in a way. He was able to come along. When he woke up the next morning, he opened the seventh door and saw a picture of a sheep eating grass in front of some high walls. The fourth sheep. The angel Ephriel and King Caspar had rode Elizabeth, Joshua the shepherd, and the three sheep over the great belt. We're going ashore again. The island is called Finn, and it's exactly 1,599 years since Jesus was born in Bethlehem. From the sea they ran towards a large castle on a mound between ramparts and moats. That's Nyborg Castle. We're standing in front of the oldest royal fortress in Scandinavia. Elizabeth pointed to the ramparts. There's a sheep. Then it is one of us. With that, they all leaped up onto the ramparts, the three sheep first, Joshua and King Caspar after them, Elizabeth and Ephriel last. A soldier rushed out between the buildings of the castle. He raised a spear and shouted, "Stop, thieves!" The next moment, three or four more soldiers came storming about. All of them had spears, and one of them had a kind of gun as well. The angel Ephriel stepped forward. "Fear not," he said with a gentle voice, "for I bring tidings of great joy. This sheep will come with us to the Holy Land where the Christ child is to be born." Only one of the soldiers dared to look up. "Be merciful unto us and take the sheep with you," he cried. The sheep had already joined the others, as if it belonged to the flock, and Joshua struck his crook on the ground and said, "To Bethlehem, to Bethlehem." Off they went across the green island, the four sheep first, Joshua, Caspar, Ephriel, and Elizabeth following. On the bank of a small river they passed a town with narrow streets and one-story dwellings. On the outskirts stood an ancient stone church with a square tower. That's the Church of Odense. It's named after Saint Canute, who was killed here in the year 1086. Elizabeth pointed at Ephriel's arm. The gold and mother of pearl was glittering. "What time is it on the angel watch?" "It's 1,537 years after Christ. From now on, the Bible will be printed in all the languages of the world, so everyone can read about Jesus. For in these days the art of printing will be invented. Before this, books have been written by hand and only by priests who were able to read the Bible. But not so many have learned to read. Now it is decided that all the nations must go to school." Some years before this, a Polish astronomer called Copernicus appeared. He insisted that the earth was as round as a ball and moves in orbit around the sun. This wasn't news to wise men, but to most people it was a strange and exciting idea. Sailors could now travel around the world, and that is how Christopher Columbus reached America in the year 1492. Then the Spanish sailors attacked the Indians cruelly. In the opinion of the kings of the Orient, it would have been better if they had kept to the ships of the desert, for there is no more peaceful animal than a camel in the desert, and the peace is the message of Christmas. Elizabeth understood about half of what the wise men had said, and Joshua struck the ground with his crook and said, "To Bethlehem, to Bethlehem." They went on their way along a ridge that gave them a good view over the fen. Now and then they looked down on a horse drawing a plow or an ox harnessed to a cart. "It's not so flat here, but we're still in Denmark, aren't we?" The angel nodded. "Yes, indeed, and the Danes are very proud of the ridges like this, but we're no more than 100 meters above sea level. They have been called the hillsides we can see down. There is to the left, the Finn Alps. Another ridge is called Himmel, heavenly mountain. In heaven, we're always considered this to be a slight exaggeration." The procession had paused, and Caspar joined in the conversation. "But it's important to be happy with what you have, however little it is. It's infinitely more than nothing." Elizabeth stood still. If the world was as smooth as a ball, there wouldn't be a single mountain on the whole earth. But then even a rocky slope would be just as exciting as the highest mountain in Norway, as long as it was the only rocky slope. "So you see," said Caspar, nodding. Elizabeth didn't quite understand what he meant. "So you see how easily clever ideas travel. You've been with the wise men for only a short time, and you've already understood a tiny part of the heavenly wisdom. Bravo!" Elizabeth was glad she'd said something clever, so she felt encouraged and tried again. "And if the world was as small as the moon, nobody would complain that it hadn't been made a little bit larger." "How true that is," said Caspar. "Even if the world had been no larger than a pea, it would be just as big of a mystery. But where would a little pea have come from? That too would have been created by God. And it's no easier to create a pea than to create the whole solar system." Elizabeth thought that statement was a bit of an exaggeration, for if the world hadn't been any larger than a pea, it wouldn't have had room for Adam and Eve. It was as if the wise man was afraid she was going to protest. He quickly continued, "Even if there had been only one star in the sky, that one star would have aroused just as much wonder as all of the other stars together. After all, nobody goes around complaining because there's only one moon. On the contrary, if there were 100 moons, they would have gotten into each other's way. So the creation of billions of stars in the sky was a luxurious exaggeration. Whenever there's too much of anything, you can stare at it without appreciating it. That's how it's possible to get out under a starry sky and fail to see a single star because of a shower of shooting stars." That was quite true, thought Elizabeth. Caspar continued, "In the opinion of the kings of the Orient, God spoiled humans a little because he created far too much at the same time. He created so many strange things to look at that many people don't see God. But that's how he managed to hide himself, too. He wouldn't have been able to do that if only 4 people, 3 trees, 2 sheep, and 8 camels existed in the whole of creation. If only one fish could be found in the sea, people would probably have noticed how perfect it was, and then they might have started asking who had made it." For a while he stood there, looking around him. Elizabeth thought he was waiting for someone to clap, and so she clapped, and then the other clapped as well. There, that wasn't so much to clap for, although it was infinitely more than nothing." The procession of pilgrims ran down towards a small town beside the narrow strip of water. This town is called the Little Belt, and the name of this town is Middelfart. The time is 1,504 years after Christ. Before Elizabeth was able to ask how they were going to cross the Sound, Joshua was on his way towards a boat that lay moored to a little pier. In the boat was a young man drawing a fishing line. When he saw the angel, he dropped the line into the sea and threw himself onto the dock. "Be not afraid. We are pilgrims on our way to the Holy Land. Can you row us over the Little Belt? Amen, amen, amen." The angel knew his answer meant yes. The 4 sheep and the rest of the pilgrims climbed on board. As the ferryman rowed across the Sound, he stared and stared at the angel. It was probably the first time he'd seen a proper angel. He didn't so much as glance at the Black King Caspar. If the angel had not been with them, Elizabeth thought, the ferryman most certainly had more than enough to do staring at King Caspar, since it was probably the first time he had ever seen a black man. Only if the king had not been with them would he perhaps have looked at her. She thought that was a little unfair that the world should be like that. When they reached the other side, the sheep began jumping out of the boat, and they said thank you and goodbye to the ferryman. As for the ferryman, he only repeated many, many more times, Amen, amen, amen. Joachim had just finished reading when Mamma came into the room. He crumpled up the paper, but she saw that he was hiding something. What are you holding in your hand? Nothing, only air. May I see it then? But Joachim held the crumpled paper so hard that his knuckles went white. It's a Christmas present. Christmas present? For me? Joachim nodded. Then I won't look. But it must be a very tiny Christmas present. It's infinitely bigger than nothing. Joachim thought it was strange that everything that had to do with Christmas was so special. It was only the most secret things in the whole world. But Mamma was wrong about one thing. What he was holding in his hand wasn't such a tiny Christmas present. So that's the end of chapter 7.